The focus of our story is on the crew of a Wellington Bomber Registry HE553, which was built by Vickers Armstrong at Chester. It was first received by the RAF on 2nd of February 1943 and was later transferred to 432 Squadron at Skipton on Swale on 2nd of May 1943. 432 Squadron was formed at Skipton on Swale near Thirsk on 1st of May 1943 as a bomber unit within No. 6 Group of the Royal Canadian Air Force. This unit was adopted by the town of Leaside in Toronto, and the unit was known as the Leaside Squadron. Initially, this squadron was equipped with Wellington bombers. The squadron motto was Saeviter ad lucem, which in English means ferociously towards the light. We can safely assume by rank the skipper of our Wellington was Flight Lieutenant Leslie Edwin Blight of the Royal Canadian Air Force. He was 25 years old and from Jarvis in Canada. Leslie was born on 27th of July 1918 in Ridgetown and was the son of Alfred and Alice Blight. As a young man, he attended the University of Toronto, gaining a degree in pharmacy, and then worked in a chemist. He was living in Jarvis when he enlisted into the RCAF on 2nd of July 1940. After undertaking basic training in Canada, he left for the UK. He received a commission to the rank of pilot officer on 11th of February 1941 and became a flight lieutenant on 11th of February 1943. His second was pilot officer Fred Thompson Dingwall of the Royal Canadian Air Force. He was 29 years old and from Asquith in Canada. Fred was the son of Fred John and Charlotte Dingwall and was born on 26th of December 1914 in Asquith. As a young man, he worked as a butcher and enlisted into the RCAF in Saskatoon on 27th of June 1941. He was posted to the UK and completed his training in various units around Yorkshire. He was posted to 432 Squadron on 1st of May 1943 on the formation of the squadron at Skipton on Swale. Fred married 21-year-old Violet Hill on 15th of May 1943 at Ripon. It's a sad reminder of how brief some relationships are in wartime, as he was to be killed only 2 weeks later. Their crew consisted of the navigator, Sergeant Donald Harmon, from Banff in Canada, the bomb aimer, Sergeant Francis James Naylor, from Newton Lee Willows in Lancashire, the wireless operator and gunner, Sergeant Joseph David Edmund LaChapelle, from Montreal in Canada, and finally, the gunner, Sergeant Leadley from Mena, Saskatchewan in Canada. On Saturday 29th of May 1943, Leslie Blight and his crew were to be part of one of the largest raids on Germany to date. This operation formed part of the wider Battle of the Ruhr and was later to be recognized as the first firestorm bombing of its kind. This operation was to include 719 aircraft from across the RAF and Allied forces. Blight and his crew took off from their base at Skipton on Swale late in the evening, tasked with bombing the city of Wuppertal in Germany. They and other Wellingtons formed up and joined many other squadrons to fly across England and into Germany to carry out their nighttime raid. This must have been such a spectacular sight in the evening sky. Moonlight was low and the sky was dark. German forces did not see them coming. Their attack was aimed at the long and narrow Barmen area of Wuppertal and went on to be hugely successful. Both Pathfinder marking runs and main force bombing runs were particularly accurate, and a large fire developed in the city, leading to mass destruction of factories and the surrounding buildings. It was Saturday night. Many of the town's fire and air raid officials were not present, having gone to their country homes for the weekend, and the fire services of the town, dealing with their first raid, were not able to control the fires. Allied crews completed their missions, but in doing so lost 33 of the 719 aircraft during the raid. Our Wellington bomber crew successfully completed their part in this mission and made their way back to England. As they reached England, the weather turned and thick clouds formed. As they approached Yorkshire, they became lost and overflew their base. Fred, Leslie and Donald, the navigator, must have been desperately trying to position the aircraft, but unable to do so, they decided to drop through the cloud to obtain a better view. They must have been totally unaware they were actually flying over the high ground of Swaledale at Fremington Edge, near Reeth. At 4:40 in the morning of Sunday 30th of May, 1943, they crashed through a dry stone wall and into the ground perilously close to the edge of the hill. Fred and Leslie were sadly killed in the impact, but all their crew, although injured, survived the crash. It was reported the aircraft was totally smashed after the crash, and it would take time to clear the site. Sledges were used to drag the heavier items some distance over wet heather to the nearest road. The damaged dry stone wall had to be rebuilt. In an interesting side issue, local children from the pretty village of Reeth managed to get to the crash site before all the ammunition was cleared and pinched much of it. North Riding police officers spent some time recovering this dangerous loot, and I suspect a few ticking-offs were dished out too. Fred and Leslie were both buried in Ripon Cemetery on Wednesday 2nd of June 1943 in Commonwealth military graves, which are still lovingly cared for to this day. Whilst there's not much known about La Chapelle or Leadley, Francis Naylor received his commission on 4th of November 1943 to pilot officer and later promoted to flight officer on 4th of May 1944. Sadly, Francis was to be killed only days before the end of the war. On 10th of April 1945, his Lancaster bomber was hit by flak, and whilst bailing out, he fell from his parachute and was sadly killed. He is buried in Nederweert War Cemetery, Holland, and was 24 years old. Donald Harmon went on to complete the huge achievement of 32 successful missions. Having survived the war, he returned home to Canada and took over his father's photography business, Baron Harmon Photos, which is still in business to this day. He passed away in August 1997 at the grand age of 80. There is a monument dedicated to the Royal Canadian Air Force and 432 Leaside Squadron on the green at Skipton on Swale, under the shade of a Canadian maple tree.